Uh, my name is Brian Lindholm. I'm the Chief of Staff for School District U-46. And we started doing these Unite U-46 sessions almost exactly 2 years ago. And I don't think we would have been successful in passing the referendum, and with all honesty, without the community feedback and support. But also it's helping us do our work better to hold these sessions and hear from you and make sure that we know what the community is looking for as we make these, pretty monumental decisions that are going to shape the future of U-46. So thank you very much for coming tonight. We've got a lot of exciting news to share with you tonight, and then we've got an activity at the end where we want to hear from you like we always do. So we may ask at the end for some people to kind of combine at tables, because it works a lot better if you've got a table full of 6 or 8 people for the activity, but actually it looks like you guys have spaced yourselves pretty well. But anyway, we will go ahead and we'll roll into it. If you haven't already, there is a sign-up sheet at every table, and if you could enter your information there, it'll help us follow up with you if there's anything tonight that we need to share with everybody who is in attendance, let you know about the future events. It helps us keep in touch with you. So please sign into to the sign-in sheet at your table if you haven't already. Introduce yourself to the people you're seated with, who you'll be working with later in the activity. We have several ways to collect feedback from you. So as we said, there's going to be an activity later you're going to be working on in teams. There are also these green forms that say, I have a question. And if you fill out a question that you want us to address, we will personally get back to you as quickly as we can. So we are committed to doing that. So please fill those out. There's also ways you could submit it through Let's Talk or on email. But if you want to, just while you're here, fill out one of those by hand. We will make sure that we get back to you with a personal response, and we'll do our best to do it as early as next week. So for tonight, we have a couple different things that we want to share with you. One is a more general update on the shift of 6th graders into the middle school in U-46, which is going to represent a significant shift. And there's a lot of facilities and logistical updates that we've been talking about, but there's a lot of instructional updates that are needed as well. So we're going to talk about, we've got some members of the team that's planning what that transition looks like in terms of the 6th grade curriculum, the academic teaming, how we're going to support students through those transitions. You'll hear more about that tonight. Then many of you, I would imagine, are here to learn more about the boundary recommendations for our first new middle school to open in Bartlett in the fall of 2025, so really just over a year away. So we will be sharing the boundary recommendations that were presented to the board on Monday night. So they have not been approved yet. The board will vote and take action on those on May 20th, but we will share with you kind of exactly what the board heard on Monday night. And then we'll give you some plans, more general overview of our plans for opening that school and what it looks like the first year. And then we'll close with some more details on the transition, on how we're going to support our students through that shift. So at this point, I am going to turn it over to Julie Shoemaker, our Executive Director of Middle Schools, and she's going to describe more of the work that's being done on the instructional side to support the shift to our new middle school model. Julie.
Thank you, Brian. I'm Julie Shoemaker. I'm the Executive Director of Middle Schools. To make that an easy understanding, I'm in charge of all 8 middle schools, and I got some of my peeps in the back, so thank you for supporting me. There you go. I'm like, come on, guys. So how did we start? Well, when we started talking about transitioning to a 6, 7, and 8 building, we realized there's a need to have a great change in our district. And so what we started was an internal call to committee. And in that internal call to committee, there were several staff members that joined. Once that committee was formed, they decided that they needed to have a common goal and purpose and understanding that they're working towards. So they read the book, The Successful Middle School, This We Believe. And from that book study that they did, they created the belief system of a portrait of a thriving adolescent. And I'll go over all those in a second. Once they got all that done, they realized the vast amount of work that whole committee had to do, so they divided into 4 subcommittees. The 4 subcommittees are curriculum and instruction, advisory, schedule, and transition planning. You will hear from the transition team today. So we started with the moral imperative as the committee goes. And in that moral imperative was to change systems until they work for all students. We read a book, and in that book that was written by the American Middle Level Education, or AMLE as we call them, they came up with 18 characteristics of what a successful middle school looks like at grades 6 through 8. And they divided it into 3 subgroups, and that's what's pictured on here are the 3 subgroups. Curriculum, instruction, and assessment is just what you think. We are going to challenge our kids. We're going to give them life experiences. They're going to be able to question and analyze. And then our assessments will not only be formal assessments, but also experiential assessments. The leadership and organization is how are we building our 6-8 buildings so that we have strong leader capacity that involves parents and staff and all community stakeholders, which is one of the things we're doing tonight with the transition committee. And then culture and community. Is the building safe? Is it welcoming and inviting? What other measures have we made or put in place to help all of our students socially and emotionally succeed, as well as, again, involving all of our stakeholders throughout the process of being in the 6-8 building. This committee, like I said, after they read that book, so we started with that moral imperative. Then we went to this book that gave us a nice piece of framework. They decided that there are characteristics that we want every U-46 middle schooler to have, and they named it The Portrait of a Thriving Adolescent. There are 6 different components in there, and those 6 components are to be empowered so that they're self-advocates, they're goal setting, to be culturally competent, to have emotional intelligence, meaning they're going to make healthy decisions, they're going to have empathy, they're going to share and express themselves in an appropriate way. Civic-minded, how do they give back to the community? What can they do to develop strong community relations, as well as understand, and these are our students we're talking about, understand local and national as well as global concerns. Developing our students to be critical thinkers, how they can use the inquiry cycle, as well as understanding concepts to develop new products or ideas, as well as analyze their results. And then the last one is an effective communicator, which all of us know the importance of being an effective communicator in multiple platforms with multiple audiences. Before we do our construction updates, I just have a quick question. How many of you attended a middle school that was a 6, 7, 8 building? Oh, wow. Okay. So this is new. As you can imagine, that committee has a lot of work, right? So one of the things, like I said, you'll hear later from is one of our subcommittees, which is a transition committee. But before we get to that, we're going to hit up on some of the new construction updates, and Dr. Johnson will present those.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Mrs. Shoemaker. So I am very excited to be able to share some of our construction updates. I know many of you have likely been over in the area that was once Hawk Hollow Elementary School off of Jacaranda. And so tonight I'm going to share some photos, give you some updates, not only for the updated middle school in Bartlett, but some of the things that you should also expect to see then across other middle schools as well. So our work in progress last November was our groundbreaking, or December actually. It was a beautiful day. We have seen great progress on the exterior of the building. The size of the building is almost going to double. So it's going to become almost 200,000 square feet-ish, which makes it a much larger building. And the exterior of the building, of course, then needs some significant updates with foundation, masonry, all of the curb and the drive-in, detention ponds, all of those pieces. So those are things that are all nearing completion as we continue to make progress. Goal is to have all of that completed by early fall, and then we can work on the interior of the building as well. You'll see some photos later in just a little bit tonight, so you can see some of the steel work progressing and some of the changes as well there, as well as the creation of some of those interior walls and door frames, and how you go about turning an elementary school into a middle school to welcome 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. So here are some of those photos. Photo on the left, if you've been in Hawk Hollow, that was actually one time the library. And the library is going to be turned into 2 art rooms. So that's on the 2nd floor. They're going to be turned into 2 art classrooms that will welcome 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. That photo in the middle, you can see some foundation. You can see some of the girders that will help with the masonry. That's to frame out walls for what will become a new gymnasium as well as the auxiliary gym. And that progress, again, underway. If you do drive by, you likely see that that's already, we have stair towers, we have walls, things are quickly progressing. And then the other photo really is just the other side there as you look out to see the expansive land next to Hawk Hollow, which will create those fields and those spaces that 6th, 7th, and 8th graders need for outdoor education and all of the activities and athletics that come along with being a middle schooler. These photos were taken in what was at one time the gymnasium in Hawk Hollow. So that gymnasium is currently being turned into 4 science labs. So 2 that are stacked, 2 on the 1st floor, 2 on the 2nd floor. They'll be divided by a science prep space so that there is room and opportunity to prepare and plan all of those hands-on science-based labs and learning opportunities that you would expect to see. And so that's exciting to see that transformation as well. Again, some more photos. We have been walking the site regularly. We have been walking the site not only with our Board of Education, of course, our construction management team, but also trustees from the Village of Bartlett as well. So in some of these photos, again, we do have some pictures with some of our trustees and also Mayor Wallace. We have Trustee Gunstein and Trustee Gansey as well in these photos. That photo in the middle, while that is still in what will be the art room, actually looks out to one of the places where the new wing will tie into that building. One of the things that we will see in this building, oh, what did I do? Sorry. That was me. Won't hit that button. Okay, so one of the things that you'll see with the new building and something that we will work on doing then across all of them is that grade levels will be created in pods or wings. So we will have wings where 6th grade classrooms and 6th grade teams will predominantly be together. 7th grade classrooms and teams would be together, and 8th grade as well. So for this building then, we have to create some of those spaces and tie them back into the original building. Those are also updates then that you would expect to see across all of our buildings over the next 5 to 7 years as well. Some of those other spaces, though, again, like those art classrooms, those would be shared spaces, meaning that 6th grade would have 6th grade art or 7th grade or 8th grade, and we actually call them other things, but for this purpose, but they wouldn't necessarily all be there at the same time. So that's one of our pieces around creating that 6th, 7th, and 8th grade structure and what we call a middle school program. These photos show you some of the samples and things that we're looking at when it comes to updating classrooms. Again, the classrooms certainly at what will be the new middle school, but across the school district as well. We know that there's a lot of research about the importance of natural light, the importance of having light that is actually conducive to learning, that isn't too bright, isn't too dull. Ceiling tiles that can also help control the brightness, but also control sound for our students, as well as looking at floor tiles, paint colors, other samples. So we're in the process of creating some of those sample classrooms. And of course, this being a new school, and then things that we'll look to bring forward to all of them, it's looking at color combinations for branding the school. I know that in some of our schools, they're quite large, and it's difficult as you navigate that building if you don't have color markers or sight paths to help you navigate. So when we look at some of these color patterns or combinations, it will also help our students, our staff, our families navigate the buildings based on color and where they're at and what those classrooms are. So those are some of the samples that we are also busily taking a look at. In addition then to the middle school in Bartlett, we have some other significant projects to update middle school learning across the school district. This is a photo of the property next to Hilltop Elementary School. off of Roberson Road in Elgin that has recently been purchased to build a new middle school in Elgin. As announced last year, we're moving forward with retiring Ellis Middle School as well as Abbott Middle School. And so we've acquired the land. We are currently in the phase of conceptual design, which means that we're working with an architect firm to start identifying how to best utilize that plot of land to turn it into a middle school. And again, meeting the same programming or very similar programming expectations, that it be welcoming for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, that kids are teamed, that there are wings or pods or arms of the building to support that we have all the updated flexible learning spaces for specials or elective courses that you would want your students to experience. Our target for this is that it will open in the fall of 2026, which is a year after the opening of the middle school in Bartlett. That middle school will be ready for occupancy in the fall of 2025. In addition to that middle school, we have some other significant projects for updates in the district as well, knowing that we need to create some additional space to welcome students, and again, updating those spaces so that students can have similar experiences across the middle school program. So one of those sites is Kimball Middle School in Elgin. We've also started our conceptual design there. So we have an architect and construction manager hired, and that as well will take into consideration creating those spaces so that our 6th, 7th, and 8th graders can be teamed together, updating those flexible learning spaces, making sure that it aligns with the program that Ms. Shoemaker outlined for us about what it means to be a thriving adolescent. And then in South Elgin, that also means even updating Kenyon Woods Middle School. So similar to that, creating those spaces and making sure that we provide that consistency. Eventually, that will reach out to all of our middle schools. These projects, because they're essential to be able to move 6th grade into our middle school starting in 2026, have been prioritized for that work as well. So we're very excited, and we look to provide additional updates as we continue with this process over the next several years. And so at this time then, I'm going to turn this back to Mr. Lindholm.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. So in a few minutes, we will share the specific boundary recommendations for the new middle school here in Bartlett, because I know many of you probably came to hear more about that tonight. As I mentioned, this is pretty much exactly what was shared with the Board of Education on Monday evening, so this is just to get you current with everything that we've shared so far. And just to confirm, that's the only boundary recommendation that we'll really be talking about tonight and that we're bringing forward to the board this school year is for the one new middle school. As Dr. Johnson had shared, we have other projects that are underway, both at the middle school level and at the elementary level, that would not be ready until at least the following year. So any of those boundary recommendations would not take effect until 2026 at the earliest. So we will be working on those next school year, and we'll be using these sessions to keep you informed and bringing those recommendations to the Board of Education probably in early to mid-spring of 2025. But again, just for tonight, it's just for the one new middle school at Bartlett, which will sort of precede all of our other projects by at least a year. There is a QR code on this page if any of you are interested. It's kind of a neat virtual walkthrough, about 5 minutes of the new building, give you an idea of what the building at the former Hawk Hollow site will look like when it's completed. It's pretty cool. So it's there if you're interested. This spring, we have really spent a lot of time trying to hear from the community in terms of what criteria and guidelines we should be prioritizing as we go about establishing these new boundaries. We know boundaries are very personal. There's a lot of very strong opinions on how it impacts families and neighborhoods and communities. And so we are doing this because we want to hear from you. So the last session, if any of you were at Elgin High School, was really focused around getting feedback around some of those criteria. We have an online survey that we've now collected over 2,000 responses, and if you haven't completed the survey yet, There's a QR code on the next page, and we're going to leave it open for another week. So if you'd like to take that survey, it's a fairly brief survey, but it asks you to kind of tell us what you value in terms of how the school boundaries would be established. And we're going to show you tonight how we are taking that feedback and we're using that feedback as we develop our recommendations. The picture in the middle, this is kind of a neat story. We had a group of Streamwood High School students in for a student government day, probably about 2 weeks ago at the district office. These were students that either selected or I guess were like voluntold that they were going to go and like kind of learn how a school district runs that day. So those lucky students got to spend most of the day with us. But it was awesome because the kids were like, we walked them through a similar activity and they were so into it and they had such interesting ideas. And some of them were very consistent with what we had heard from the adults that we'd been running through these activities, but some of them were very different too. So I don't know. I think it reminded us that we need to create more opportunities to hear from our kids on issues like this. And we're already starting to plan on how next year, maybe perhaps we could use the superintendent student advisory board. We could use some of the principal student advisory boards to get kids more involved in providing feedback on issues like this that are going to impact the future of the district, even if maybe not them directly, because maybe they would have moved out, but they may have siblings, they've got friends, they've got neighbors, and they're invested in the success of U-46. So anyway, that was really affirming for us, and like I say, we definitely have taken their feedback to heart. The good news is, though, across all of these different channels and from all of the people that we've heard from, the feedback has been fairly consistent. And once we close the survey, we will provide a summary of the results so people can see kind of exactly the numbers around which guidelines were prioritized. But the things that have pretty consistently risen to the top, and it's probably not surprising to any of you, but they're things like distance and travel times to schools. We had a lot of people who said it's hard to understand when you drive past one school to get to the other school that your kids attend. If we could avoid things like that. And as a parent, I totally agree. So, that distance and travel times to schools, proximity to schools, keeping neighborhoods or communities together, feeder patterns. So do all the kids from the elementary school attend the same middle school? And do all the kids from the middle school attend the same high school? That was an interesting one where I think so far parents and adults have felt that pretty consistently is something that's important and that we should try to honor wherever possible. The group of kids that we talked to, and I know this is a small sample size, but the group of kids thought that it may not be as high a priority. They thought it's not such a bad idea sometimes to mix kids up and make new friends as you transition to the different levels. So we thought that was really, really interesting that they had a slightly different take on that. Ability of siblings to stay in the same school, and then stability of attendance boundaries. So this is one we're going to talk about some tonight, like really trying to, once we set these new boundaries, we're not going to go back and change them again. And once we transition kids into a new school, we're not going to then turn around and say the next year you have to go attend a different school. We know that transitions are, can be difficult and even, traumatic for some of our students. So we really want to try to minimize those wherever possible. And I think when we explain our plan for opening the new school in Bartlett, you'll see how we've tried to take that into consideration to avoid back-to-back transition years for our students. And so I think at this point, I am going to turn it over to my colleague, Mark Moore, and he is going to walk you through how we arrived at our specific boundary recommendations.
Thank you. I'm going to go up on the stage so I can point. This is the southeast corner of the district. It's mostly Bartlett, but Wayne is here. The little bit of Carroll Stream we have is down there. But pretty much it's Bartlett, and the new middle school is there. That funky-looking schoolhouse where Hawk Hollow Elementary was. This is the full map of middle schools. And as we move down towards the southeast corner, this represents all of Kenyon Woods, which is some of Bartlett, some of South Elgin, little bits of corners of Elgin. Eastview is a very north-south section, and then Teft is on the east side, Hanover Park, a little bit of Bartlett, a little bit of Streamwood. As we move in closer, we're kind of zooming in, if you will, towards where new Hawk Hollow is. And remember that the new school has a capacity of about 750 students. So in 3 grades, it's about 250. That's smaller than Eastview. So we needed to identify where could we draw students that will fill up to about 750 without being too small and without being too big. So to do that, we took the schools that are closest, which are Prairie View, Spring Trail. They're right next door. And in fact, when we closed Hawk Hollow as an elementary, we split the Hawk Hollow boundary to go to Prairie View and to Spring Trail. So all of those schools, plus all of Sycamore Trails, just for reference, this up north-south is Route 59. The top here is Stearns Road until you get to this little cutout. That's still Stearns. This is Centennial Elementary. And then over here, this line is the railroad, the north-south railroad that you cross when you go west on West Bartlett Road or across on Stearns Road before you get to Powys. So west of Route 59, it includes the portion of Wayne Elementary that is east of the railroad tracks. And there's this little bit of Liberty. This is the very southern portion of Liberty Elementary. Most of it is empty, forest preserve. There's a small neighborhood right here that also goes to the new school. This page breaks it down. These are the 3 elementaries that send all of the students to the new school. And then splitting the Wayne Elementary. Wayne's boundary looks like it draws in lots, but remember, most of it's forest preserve. So even though it's a lot of geographic area, it's not a very large elementary school. So the eastern portion of Wayne, east of the railroad tracks, goes to the new school. The western portion of Wayne Elementary stays at Kenyon Woods. And then here's the full Liberty boundary. Just that one neighborhood in the very south of that boundary will go to the new school. All the rest remains at Kenyon. One of the factors we use to decide will we have space for everybody is what are the developments that are coming? And this is from the Bartlett Planning Department. There are no housing developments planned within the new Hawk Hollow boundary. The grasslands, which is by Liberty, is far north of Stearns, up by Liberty. Those would not be going to Hawk Hollow. The rest of the dots are commercial, industrial. I'm not quite sure what institutional means, but it's not housing. And this one, the residential, is just east of downtown. Why not all of Wayne, for example, going to Hawk Hollow? Well, then we have too many students. And that part of Wayne is closer to Kenyon Woods. Why not all of Liberty? Well, because then we'd be way over the student count. We'd be over by about 200. That small portion of Liberty is closer to Hawk Hollow. Brian is going to talk about the demographics and some more information about the students who will go to the new school.
Thank you, Mark. So, as we mentioned, the target enrollment then is about 250 students per grade. So, and the demographics based on the schools that Mark just showed you that will be feeding into the new middle school, we looked at the kids who are currently in grades 3, 4, and 5. So that would be the first time that school is at full occupancy of grades 6, 7, and 8. And based on that, the demographics would be almost identical to what we currently see at Eastview, which is probably not surprising because a lot of the students who will attend this new school would have attended Eastview. So the demographics are a little different than the rest of the district, which is no surprise, to probably any of you, and certainly wasn't to us. This portion of the district, there are more white students, there are more Asian students than across U-46, and there are fewer Hispanic or Latino, slightly fewer black students. Again, that's just based on the population in this corner of the district. These demographics would match, like I say, almost exactly what Eastview serves today. I had touched on this before, so our plan for opening the school the first year would be just 7th grade. So it would just be 250 students. And I'll explain a couple reasons for that. We won't have the other projects completed that Dr. Johnson had mentioned, the other new middle school in Elgin, the additions to 2 of our other middle schools. Those won't be ready until the following year. Until those are ready, we really don't have space in all of our middle schools to add a whole nother grade level We also have a couple middle schools that we're planning to retire as soon as we make this shift, and we did not feel like it was the best case to try to kind of jam a bunch of kids into these middle schools in their last year of operation, and then just to have them attend new schools the following year. So this year, the other schools, nobody's boundaries will change in 2025. This is the only boundary adjustment that we'll make, and the only students that will be attending this new school would be that new group of 7th graders who would not have started middle school yet because they would have still finished 6th grade at their current elementary school. They would roll into 7th grade. For the kids who had already started 7th grade the previous year and they're going to become 8th graders, they would just stay at their current school. And that would avoid them having 2 transitions in 2 years because our middle school experience is already a short one with only 2 years, and we just didn't think it made any sense to have them turn around and switch schools again the following year. The other reason that we're doing it this way is assuming that our construction stays on schedule, and they're off to a great start because we've really taken advantage of the warm weather this winter. They did a lot more exterior work in some of those colder months than we probably would have anticipated. And if everything stays on schedule and the building is ready to open, we didn't feel we could just leave the building vacant for a year waiting for the other projects to catch up. We wanted to get students into the school. So that's another reason that we've decided on this plan. However, this kind of feeds into the activity that we're going to have you guys helping us with in a few minutes. Is I would imagine you'd have all sorts of questions now of how's that going to work exactly? Like if you have siblings, how are we going to manage sibling preferences? So you've got an 8th grader at Eastview and you've got a 7th grader who would be assigned to this new school. What sort of accommodations would we make for those families? That's a very valid question. What about for those 7th graders? Well, they have all the same athletic and extracurricular opportunities that 7th graders in any of our other buildings would have. That's a valid question. And our plan is they would, but it'll look a little different because there are some of those activities that do span 7th and 8th grade, and they wouldn't have any 8th grade counterparts in the school. So say the band, they would have half as many kids participating in the band as other schools. Things like that, it will look a little different for a year. We talked about staffing, building access. There would likely be entire instructional wings of the building that would be almost shut off for that first year, which would be a little different, and it would be something we'd have to manage. And I'm sure you guys have a dozen other questions that we didn't list here. So this is just to plant the seed. This is part of the activity for tonight, is to ask you to imagine that, your family, and maybe you don't have to imagine because a lot of you maybe are impacted, but it is like if your kids were to be the first cohort or one of the first cohorts to attend the school, what kind of questions do you still have, and what kind of questions would you expect that we would be providing answers to in the months to come? Naming the school, not to pick on my friend Mark. Mark called it Hawk Hollow Middle School a couple times, and when I get the question, we say, "Is it going to be called Hawk Hollow Middle School?" I'm like, it might, or it might not. So it's not automatically going to be called Hawk Hollow Middle School. The Board of Education is responsible for naming our new buildings. We do have a board policy that specifically kind of specifies what that process looks like. What we did want to mention tonight, though, is part of that board policy says that anyone from the U-46 community can submit nominations for ideas that they would like the board to consider. So that's one of the things we wanted to make sure that you are aware of tonight. There's details on our website, but in all honesty, it's not all that complicated. You just need to provide some rationale for your recommendation. The stipulations are things like if you suggest to name it after a person, it can't be a person who's still living, so there's that, I guess, right? It has to be somebody who's made significant contribution to society. You explain why. But as long as it's kind of within those kind of guidelines, you submit a nomination and it will be considered. Those names then will be reviewed at a public meeting of some sort, and then the board is able to take those into consideration when we ultimately come up with the naming decision. So that's how that will work. And that name will be established well before we open the school. So that will happen, sometime in the next several months. And at this point, I think I turn it back to one of the members of our middle school steering committee, our director of multicultural and multilingual education, Griselda Pirtle. So here you go, Griselda.
Thanks so much. Buenas tardes. Good afternoon. As Brian mentioned, my name is Griselda Purtle. I'm the director of the Multilingual and Multicultural Education Department. Julie mentioned to you earlier that we have a larger steering committee to really move this work forward. We are the subcommittee, which really has thought through some of the transition for our community, for our parents, and for our students. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that I co-lead this committee with Dr. Latrice Satterwhite, who is the current Director of Specialized Student Services. She could not be here tonight. What I'm going to start with is introducing our subcommittee, and we have some of our peeps over in the back, so thank you for coming and representing and continuing the work. Something that I really hope that you notice from this slide is the various representation that we have on the committee. This really brings about different perspectives, different experiences to inform this really important work. Our subcommittee is grounded in two important goals for our students, right? The first is that students will be confident to navigate their new environment. Also, that students will have that strong sense of belonging, not only in their classrooms, but in their overall school environment as well. So before I continue, I do want to point out that we mentioned the new middle school in Bartlett. And so the information that I'll be sharing on this slide and the subsequent slides will also benefit the transition for those students as well. Obviously, it'll be earlier, but mostly, or not mostly, but it will also benefit the larger wave of students that will be transitioning in the 26-27 school year. One very important element of our subcommittee work is thinking about our parents and our community. We want to make sure that we hold information sessions in the fall, winter, and spring in the year prior to that larger transition, so that our community and our families are informed. We've already kind of thought through and brainstormed what are some of those different topics that would be important for our parents and our community. So you can see, Julie talked about that portrait of a thriving adolescent. What are those goals that we have for our kids? What is the timeline, right, of those transitions? What is the middle school model? What is the difference between middle school, junior high? Some of the new potential structures that we'll have at the middle school at that time. So these are just tentative. Of course, there will be a feedback activity at the end. So based on your feedback, this can be updated. So our number one clientele, right, our students, we will also hold very important in sessions for our students in the fall, in the spring, and the summer. One thing to keep in mind, and something that our committee really was a big part of our committee discussion, is that the very first year that we're transitioning in 26-27, we're actually transitioning 2 grade levels, right? So it'll be the 5th graders transitioning and the 6th graders transitioning. So logistics was a large part of our conversation. One of the ways that we're navigating that is that in the fall, we're proposing to hold more a Zoom event, again, held by our administrators at the building level, so that they can start to get that introduction to the people that they'll be working with at the school, but also continuing our practice of our middle school counselors and administrators visiting our elementary schools. Again, really thinking about those goals that I mentioned earlier. In the spring, we thought, okay, it's time to shift to in-person. We want to make sure that the students really immerse themselves in the middle school. We want to get that feel. We want them to see it, hear it. What does it sound like, look like? So we will be having those student visits in the spring. And in the summer, we will continue with that middle school experience. Again, engaging students in activities that continue to build those strong relationships at the school, so that we can, again, focus on those goals for our kids. Is Carla here yet? Okay. So we are very fortunate to have Carla Jimenez, which is our Director of School and Community Relations, on our committee. And she has done a really great job as we plan, really thinking through, okay, so what does that look like to keep our community informed? What does that look like to keep our parents informed? So we've already thought through, Can we build a website? That's the hub. That's the go-to for our families to really get information. We're thinking through maybe some videos of students, administrators, schools, obviously capitalizing on our social media outlets to make sure that we're continuously connected and informing our community and our families. So that's the general overview of the work that our transition subcommittee has done so far. Again, this is a really great opportunity for us because we get to hear from you in what else our students need. How can we enhance or strengthen some of those components, or maybe even add? Maybe there's something that we haven't thought about in our subcommittee. So at this point, I'll hand it over to Brian to facilitate the activity.
Okay, thank you, Griselda. So we are almost now time to transition into the work activity. It's almost like right on time by accident somehow, right at 45. And I know we want to make sure that we get a chance for you guys to talk to each other, to provide some feedback, and then get everybody out of here on time. So we will get into the work activity. This is just a reminder, though, of what this process will look like next year, because we are committed to continue to holding these sessions. As I mentioned, tonight we're really just prepared to come forward with the one boundary recommendation, but all of our middle school boundaries are going to likely have to change because we are building a new middle school, we're retiring two of our others, we're doing significant additions, and we're rolling an entire other grade level up to our middle schools. So in all likelihood, none of the middle school boundaries will look exactly the same when we're done as what they do now. So next year, for sure, all of those middle school boundaries will be coming forward. But we're also investing in our elementary schools. So that we have announced that we will be closing some of our oldest elementary schools. And at the same time, we're investing in building new elementary schools and updating some of our elementary schools to get more kids into modern learning environments. So the elementary boundaries will need to change as well. And then finally, I know a lot of you are interested about our high school boundaries. So while there are no plans to do retire high schools, build new high schools, we are looking at making adjustments to the high school boundaries as well, if nothing else, to make sure that the capacity utilization and the enrollments are more balanced across all of our schools. Over the years, there are certain areas of our district that have seen more students coming through and others that have seen fewer, and our buildings at this point do not have even capacity utilization. So if we're going to be addressing boundaries district-wide, this would be the time to make those adjustments as well. So as you can imagine, this would be a pretty massive undertaking. Think of what we presented tonight, times many schools, and that's what we'll be working on next year. So I would imagine that we'll get the school year started sometime after Labor Day. We would be holding the first one of these sessions in September, and then we'd be committed to doing several of them again next year, leading up to when those larger boundary recommendations would be coming forward to the board. Okay, so for the work group activity for this evening, you have sheets at your tables that have a couple tasks that we'd like you to take a look at. And as soon as we get ready to break here, this is where if you're at a table with only a couple people and there's spots nearby, if you wanted to join, it works better if we have larger groups of people working on this. But for the first task, is imagine that you are a parent of a current third grader who will be in the first class of sixth graders who will be shifting to the middle schools. Okay? What feedback or questions do you have as a parent? And then what feedback or questions do you think what do you think your child will want to know before they would make this shift? And this is an interesting one because if you put yourself in the minds of the kids, there are things like, how do I manage a locker? I've never had a locker before. How do those locks work? What about my class schedule? Do I have a schedule that's different from all my friends, so I'm going to be in a different room every hour of the day? These are all things that if you've been in elementary school, you haven't had to deal with yet. So all those kind of things that you would think a student may be interested in finding out more about before they shift into our middle schools, that will really help us with some of that transition planning. And then the next task is a little bit different twist on this, and this is, and again, maybe for some of you guys, this doesn't have to be use your imagination. This is pretend that you live in one of the neighborhoods that is getting a new school or a significant addition or an update to one of our existing schools. As you think about how the school's opening will impact your neighborhood, what are some elements of the transition process that come to mind? So I would hope, I know that some of the things that we're going to hear on this one will be, well, what about all the traffic and the noise and the construction and things? And that's reality. These are big projects that take a long time to complete. And if that was in your neighborhood, those would be concerns. But there are also things like when it's done, what's it going to do to the neighborhood? Are you going to get more young families that are going to be attracted to that neighborhood? What's it going to do to property values? What's it going to do to kids playing on weekends? If there's green space and soccer fields and things that they would have access to. Just what's the neighborhood going to look like with a newer and updated school relative to, say, maybe what it looks like today? So that's the second task that we'd like you to look at. So why don't we break for about 20, 25 minutes, and then we'll see how you're doing. And then what we'd like to do at the end then is for any volunteers from tables who will be willing to sort of share a readout of the discussion at your table, we'd love to hear from you. And we will collect everything if one of you can be the recorder and sort of record your team's notes as you work through the tasks. Okay? So thanks. We'll check back in about 20, 25 minutes. Okay. Do we have any volunteers for tables who would like to share out the discussion around your table for the good of the rest of the group? And if so, we'll bring you a mic, so let us know, and either Dr. Johnson or I will come over. Not all at once. Any volunteers? The other thing I would encourage, please, everything that you wrote at your table, though, please leave that, including your specific individual questions that you want us to respond back to, as well as the feedback from your group activity. But is there anybody who would like to share out? Heather.
Hey there. So we had probably the most engaged discussion I've seen at any of the Unite U-46 sections this time. Very passionate discussion. And there were extensive feelings, very passionate feelings that there has not been a lot of respect for the parents' concern and the kids' concerns about feeder patterns and the need to address the high school boundaries at the same time as the elementary boundaries. So, for example, my kiddo goes to Centennial. She's right there. And she's a fourth grader. And under these plans, now the Centennial kids will come to Eastview as they normally would. Great. But then all of the other Eastview kids will go to other high schools. They will go to Bartlett High. And then everybody else at Bartlett High will know each other from middle school, and they will be the one cohort of kids who won't know anybody. So we need to do the high school boundaries at the same time as middle. We were promised those middle schools at the same time. And at the very least, we would like to see that it be done in sections. So example, if we've drawn like Bartlett, these boundaries, then do the boundaries for Bartlett and South Elgin High and the associated middle schools and the elementary underneath, and just do that section of the district and figure all of it out top to bottom all at once, and then work on another section, because we don't want, like, our buy-in on the middle schools is fully dependent on the high school plan, which we were promised and didn't get. So there we go.
Thank you, Heather. And I can vouch that was an impassioned conversation at this table, so no doubt about that. Anybody else who'd like to go before we wrap things here? Okay, if not, well, thank you all for coming. We really do appreciate your participation, your engagement, hearing from you, and like I say, we will be starting these back again in the fall. Probably just after Labor Day. So thanks very much. Have a good evening.